Headliner Nation, Kyle back with the fantasy headliners. Week 16, 17, 18, almost there to the finish line. And right now you're locking in lineups to keep your playoff push going. Hopefully you were able to survive last week, Jonathan Taylor owners, or anybody that had studs that just didn't quite give you the points needed. And now you're looking forward to week 16 and what may be coming up. Well, we're going to talk about tight ends today. I've got the tight ends from every single matchup and whether you should be starting or sitting them. And it's very important to listen to this video because there's a few graphics where you're going to say, Kyle, but the points say it should be one way or another. But my opinion is going to go the opposite direction. And I am going to tell you why in the video. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe. If you're new here and you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, why? Hit the subscribe button. Let's hop into it. Thursday night football. We have got Jacksonville and the New York Jets. Lots of Saturday games this week as well, with Sunday being Christmas. But Jacksonville and the New York Jets. Evan Ingram over the last 3 games, 32 targets. The insane volume for right now is keeping Evan Ingram more than fantasy viable. The Jets are much tougher on the outside against wide receivers than they are against tight ends. Not that it matters much, but they gave up a 51-yard touchdown to Brock Wright, tight end from the Detroit Lions last week. So who knows? Maybe Evan Ingram could be in line for a big play or two as well. He'll be a start for me this week. Tyler Conklin's numbers come out to a 15. Given the matchup, going up against Jacksonville, not a bad matchup, not a great one, not a bad one. But CJ, who's your mama, scored twice last week. And I think people are going to see that and just automatically say, well, let's get Tyler Conklin going. I'm not doing it. I'm not. Zach Wilson looks like he's going to be the starter again this week. And in every game Zach Wilson has started, Tyler Conklin has done absolutely nothing. He is a sit for me this week. Atlanta and Baltimore, and really this entire matchup, the conversation centers around Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews allows the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends right now. All right. So Atlanta giving up quite a bit of points to the tight end position. So Mark Andrews seems like he should be a smash start this week, but there's going to be a lot of people that are concerned about that. He hasn't had 100 receiving yards or a touchdown since week 6. And since week 6, he's only crossed 60 receiving yards one time. He has not been playing very well as of late. Now, some of that has to do with the back and forth at the quarterback position, which is still weird because when Tyler Huntley took over last year for Lamar Jackson when he went down with his injury, Mark Andrews was the #1 tight end in all of football down the stretch. It didn't bother me starting Mark Andrews last year and he balled out. I don't know what has changed this year. It looks like they're really just trying to run the football as much as possible. Now, the run game this year is better than it was last year as well, with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards both being healthy right now. So if you're looking at this matchup and saying to yourself, I want to sit Mark Andrews because he hasn't done anything as of recent, I mean, I get it. I understand why. But I'm going to be honest with you. In the fantasy playoffs, I would much rather go down with my studs than risking it starting some guy off the waivers that I've never played and that I'm hoping will get me a good game and watching him collapse and then missing the playoffs and missing a championship because of that. I'm still rolling with Mark Andrews. Detroit and Carolina will bring my Manscaped. Wait, no, never mind. Nope. Pull the plug on that. How about we just delete this matchup? And we're going to delete it quicker than the lawnmower is going to delete those pesky ball hairs, okay? This matchup sucks, all right? We're not starting anybody from Detroit. We're not starting anybody from Carolina. You might as well just skip over this one because if you're looking at this matchup, you're probably not even in the playoffs. Buffalo and Chicago, and I can't start Dawson Knox this week. He's been playing extremely well. Touchdowns in back-to-back games, 15 targets over the last 2 games, 10 receptions, 139 receiving yards. He's looked real good. But Chicago allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. And it's not a great matchup, and it's probably not one that I want to roll with Dawson Knox. Just because, again, when you take a look at this Buffalo offense, it's got so many different guys that really could take off again at any single point. So for me this week, I'm going to skip out on Buffalo as of right now. However, there's a massive winter storm that is going to be sweeping through the Midwest this week. Chicago may or may not be in the mix for that. I don't know as of yet. And with this game being on Saturday, there is a chance that they get piled on with a lot of snow. If the weather is bad in Chicago, I will go back to Dawson Knox as being a start. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on the rankings video. Keep an eye on the updates because he might make it as a start later in the week. Cole Kmet will be a start for me. Buffalo does allow the third fewest fantasy points to tight end, but there's no one else to throw the ball to. I mean, do we trust Justin Fields to really throw the ball to Brian Pringle all game long? Come on. No, his main target is Cole Kmet. He's missing some upside. If he's not scoring a touchdown, which he hasn't in a few weeks, he's missing some of that upside. But there's not many tight ends out there right now getting as many targets as Cole Kmet, and there's not many tight ends that are considered the number one target on their team. New York and Cleveland, and I don't know if there's a tight end outside of Travis Kelce that has higher upside than Juwan Johnson right now. I mean, this guy, if you're looking at pure upside, is the tight end 2 for me every single week. Cleveland does allow the 8th fewest fantasy points per game, and heck, New Orleans allows the 2nd fewest. So a matchup with Juwan Johnson and David Njoku that I would love could be limited with some upside. But Juwan Johnson's got 7 touchdowns in his last 7 games. He's a red zone threat every time they get near the goal line. Juwan Johnson, for me, I am still going to start even with the tougher matchup. And for David Njoku, just limit expectations. I like David Njoku. I think he is a solid play. Touchdowns in back-to-back games prior to this past week. He's still going to get looks from Deshaun Watson at this point. For me, I'm still going to run him out there. I'm just going to know that maybe 12 or 15 fantasy point day may not be in the works right now. Seattle and Kansas City, and Noah Fant is a very interesting option for me this week. We're going to be missing Tyler Lockett. Marquise Goodwin is going to kind of step in as that wide receiver too, but Noah Fant is a guy that, based on different matchups in the past, especially if anyone's been limited, he's had some decent upside. Is he going to score a touchdown this week? Going up against Kansas City, they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of tight end production. I mean, I don't know if I'm locking in any type of a touchdown this week, but I think anywhere from 4 to 6 points is definitely in the works. So then if he does score a touchdown, we're looking at a guy that's more along the lines of 12 fantasy points and definitely locked in. A tight end one performance is definitely in the atmosphere, given how bad the tight end position has been, though, around Noah Fant. And then for Travis Kelce, I mean, he gets a perfect score this week, knocking out at 25. Seattle allows the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. He's got back-to-back games over 70 receiving yards after a couple of down performances. 3 games without a touchdown, though. So he's due. I'm expecting big things from Travis Kelce this week. The Giants and the Vikings and Daniel Bellinger really for me is only kind of like an emergency option. And they're going to have to throw it a little bit. And, he might find a few targets his way. But unfortunately, the target upside just has not been there since he's returned from injury. TJ Hawkinson, now he's had 2 good matchups the last 2 weeks. And he's really failed to put together a big performance. The targets say he's top 5 potential every single week. But the production that he's actually doing is more like 10 to 12. So for me, for TJ Hawkinson, he continues to be a start just based alone on the volume. But I think we need to kind of dial back what we're expecting in terms of upside and realize that top 5 tight end potential just might not be in the works right now. Not a whole lot to see in this Cincinnati and New England matchup. Hayden Hurst, we're going to keep an eye on him to see if he is activated or ready to go this week after he was inactive last week with his calf injury. And then Jonnu Smith, I mean, he isn't anything for us. And Hunter Henry, he's had a couple of good games as of late. Who knows? Maybe he's going to get all the targets that should be going to Jacoby Myers this week. But because he's in the doghouse for letting that game slip away last week, Hunter Henry sees it. But in this matchup going up against Cincinnati, for me, I'm going to stay away from Hunter Henry. Houston and Tennessee is bringing a gut call for me this week, and that is to list Jordan Akins as a start. Now, are you starting him in your fantasy lineup? There's probably some guys that I would take a shot at over Jordan Akins if you're really looking to get somebody out there. But for Akins and me, it's specifically a gut call. Tennessee allows the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends. Brandon Cooks might miss again. Nico Collins might miss again. Akins had a touchdown last week. Davis Mills played pretty well last week as well. Does he kind of get flowing again this coming week? For me, when I take a look at all of this, I'm not sold on a Jordan Akins performance, but I definitely think getting like 8 fantasy points, given what we're seeing there in Houston, is going to be within the realm of possibilities. So I'm going to list him as a start this week. Chigioco, his points do not add up to 15, but he's kind of another emergency option for me that are getting the targets right now. Between him and Austin Hooper, they're really utilizing the tight end position, which is, kind of refreshing to see from Tennessee over the last few weeks. Chigioco for me is a guy that he's probably only going to get you 4 to 6 points. So if you're looking for a tight end to win you the week, it's not going to be Chigioco. But if you've got a lineup that has a lot of high upside players, you're dealing with issues at tight end, and you're like, man, just give me 4 to 6 points so I don't put up a 0 in that spot, there might not be anybody better than Chigioco. Washington and San Francisco, and Logan Thomas completely out for me this week. San Francisco allows the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, and Thomas, he hasn't done anything. He only has 1 game over 20 receiving yards since he returned in week 8, so he's done for me at this point. For George Kittle, though, Washington allows the fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. That's okay. Yes, it's a tough matchup. Kittle showed his upside last week, though, with those 2 touchdowns. And I told everybody when I did the rankings video, I had him at 7, but he could go as high as 3 for me. With no Debo, he's going to be targeted. And that's why I still have him as a start this week, and that's why I'm so confident in him as a start this week. The targets are going to be there, even if some of that upside is not. Philadelphia and Dallas Goedert was close last week. I mean, he was right there and then just didn't get activated. Now, he has been designated to return. So let's talk about this matchup a little bit more, because Dallas Goedert is interesting for me this week. Dallas allows the 4th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. I mentioned it last week with Evan Ingram, and Evan Ingram had a pretty decent game, right? Not bad, still startable, gave you fantasy production. Goedert was designated to return, and he couldn't quite make it back last week. But if he does this week, I'm going to list him as a start, even though it's a tough matchup, because the playbook is going to be limited with Gardner Minshew. Number one, first and foremost, the playbook that they've had with Jalen Hurts is not going to be the same with Gardner Minshew. They are going to probably condense it a little bit and try to stick with several things that they think will work well for Minshew. At this point, it's just about continuing to win out, lock in that first round bye, and then give Jalen Hurts an extra week of rest when it comes playoff time for that injured shoulder. So they got to keep winning at this point. But the big thing for me is that you're losing production in the running game, all right? With Jalen Hurts being out, Gardner Minshew, yeah, he can move around a little bit. He can run a little bit. He's not going to run as much as Jalen Hurts did, okay? It's not going to happen. So for Gardner Minshew, we're going to see kind of a limit in that rushing game that we've seen as of recent, which is going to possibly lead to more passing opportunities, especially against an offense like the Dallas Cowboys. So for me, Dallas Goedert will be a start just based on the fact that Gardner Minshew could be looking his way, more passing opportunities, and being back, I think, is a good thing for this offense. I think it helps balance everything out for them as well. Now for the Dallas Cowboys with Dalton Schultz, outside of 87 yards on 10 targets back in week 14, Schultz hasn't had more than 35 yards. He hasn't had more than 35 yards since week 10, and he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 12. He's on a really, really bad drought right now. So for me, for Dalton Schultz, he's going to be lower in the rankings this week. It's an okay matchup. It's not great. It's not even good by any means against the Philadelphia Eagles. It is an okay matchup. So for me, when I take a look at this, Dalton Schultz, if you want to roll with him, that's fine. But if you need upside, it's probably not coming from here. Las Vegas and Pittsburgh is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Make sure you head over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners when you check out. You're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Make sure you lock in some of those goodies right now into your cart. Use that code word, get yourself a nice discount, and get yourself Manscaped for the holidays. Waller scored in his return last week, looked good, the number 2 target on this team. We're going to put him back in our lineup. And then we've got Pat Freiermuth on the other side. I don't know what happened to him last week, but it's kind of irresponsible for the coaches to not look at that and say, maybe we need to do something to get Patty F back into the game plan this week. And that is what I expect to happen. Darren Waller and Pat Freiermuth are a couple of they're a couple of guys that, yes, the targets might be there, but will the production really be there? Those are the questions we have to ask. But I'm going to bank on both of them being starts this week. Darren Waller will probably be a little bit higher in my rankings. Pat Freiermuth is a little bit of a concern just because Mitchell Trubisky sucks so much. Because of that, he might be a little bit lower, but he's still a start. Green Bay and Miami, and there's really nothing to see here. Miami allows the third most fantasy points to tight ends, but we're not going to start Robert Tonyan. We're not going to start Mike Gesicki. It really doesn't matter. Neither of these guys have been fantasy viable all season long, so why would they start in the playoffs? Denver and the LA Rams, and I can't do it with Greg Dulcich anymore. I just can't. After poor performances in week 10 and 10 through 12, he kind of bounced back in week 13 and 14, looked a little bit better, thought maybe we were going to see an uptick there again, and then we've just been let down. The offense is far too inconsistent. He's far too inconsistent. There's nothing we can do with Greg Dulcich right now that really says, hey, Kyle, let's keep throwing him in our lineup. So I'm going to be out on Greg Dulcich probably for the rest of the season. However, Tyler Higbee, I called it last week, right? I said it in the start and sit video. I'm Kyle Richardson, and I have a problem, and my problem is starting Tyler Higbee. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start him again. I think Baker Mayfield is going to look his way. The targets have been there. Hopefully he finds a score, and lo and behold, my man found the end zone. Yes! I love it when the tight ends make me look smart. The targets, I think, are going to continue to roll with Baker Mayfield. I think Baker Mayfield's going to utilize Tyler Higbee, and I think Tyler Higbee is one of their better pass-catching options right now. Going up against a team like Denver, you know, you might have to throw it to the tight end a little bit more because they do a really good job on the outside versus wide receivers, and you don't really have any playmakers at the wide receiver position right now. So his upside isn't a whole lot unless he scores, but I'm going back to Tyler Higbee this week. Tampa Bay and Arizona allows the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, but I can't start Cade Otton. I can't just do it. I want to. I do, Headliner Nation. I do, but I can't. He hasn't done anything since Cameron Brate came back, all right? He hasn't been able to do anything since then, and he's just been way too inconsistent. This would be the matchup, though. This would be the matchup for him to score. So if you're betting on Cade Otton, you're betting like in the sports book for an anytime touchdown, and you're not throwing a whole lot on it. Are you betting on him for your playoffs? No. Not me. And then Trey McBride, I mean, he hasn't done anything. I mean, even with Colt McCoy last week, he didn't see any targets. They're down to they're down to their quarterback 3 at this point. So, I mean, and I take that back. Trey McBride saw a few targets last week, didn't do anything with them though. So, given this matchup, it's still hard for me to try and rely on Trey McBride. Monday Night Football is going to have the Chargers and the Colts. The Colts coming off an absolutely devastating loss this past week to Minnesota. Over the last 3 games, Gerald Everett has saw 20 targets, but he hasn't really turned them into fantasy points. So he's still getting targets. He's still getting looked, which is easy to do when you have Josh Palmer, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen on the outside, and Austin Eckler as well. When you've got that many guys that offenses have or defenses have to focus on, it kind of allows for an opportunity for Gerald Everett to slip out every once in a while and be kind of a safety valve for Justin Herbert if a play doesn't develop. But he hasn't scored since week 4. If you start him, you're hoping for about 5 points, maybe as high as 8. But if you need upside, I'm going to go somewhere else for that. And as far as the trio of tight ends from Indianapolis goes, I'm not interested in any of them. They continue to rotate all 3 of them. None of them really doing anything fantasy-wise. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for me this week on the Tight End Show. Hopefully you all enjoyed the content. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe if you're new here. And leave a comment down below if you've got any questions about any of the matchups. Let me know. What tight end are you rolling with this week in your matchup as of right now? And how many points do you think they are going to get? But ladies and gentlemen, I am going to get out of here for the day. Peace out. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.